I didn't realize the nurse who saved my life had been dead for over 30 years until the morning I was discharged. The moment I thanked the staff for her kindness, every smile in the room disappeared. 3 months ago, I was admitted to St. Augustine Medical Center after a serious car accident. The crash itself was almost forgettable compared to everything that happened afterward. A truck had run a red light during a heavy rainstorm and clipped the front of my sedan. I don't remember the impact. I only remember waking up inside an ambulance with someone shouting numbers I didn't understand while a siren echoed inside my skull. The doctors told me later that I had suffered several broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and internal bleeding. They said I was lucky. I spent 11 days recovering in the hospital. Days blurred together. Pain medication made everything feel distant, as though I were watching my own life through frosted glass. Nurses came and went. Doctors checked my lungs. Physical therapists tried to get me standing again. By the fourth night, I began noticing one particular nurse. She always came sometime after 2 in the morning. Never earlier, never later. At first, I assumed she was just part of the overnight staff. She looked older than most of the nurses, maybe in her late 50s or early 60s. Gray streaks ran through her dark hair, which she kept tied neatly into a bun. Her uniform looked slightly different from everyone else's. It was white, not the blue scrubs every other nurse wore. She also wore an old-fashioned name badge clipped high near her shoulder instead of hanging from a lanyard. Her voice was calm, gentle. She never rushed. She would quietly step inside my room, smile, and say the exact same thing every night. "Still with us? That's good." Then she'd check the monitor beside my bed, place the stethoscope against my chest, count my heartbeat, and adjust my blanket. Her hands were always strangely cold. Not freezing, just cold enough that I noticed every time. After checking my vitals, she'd smile again. "You're going to be okay." Then she'd leave. I never questioned it. Hospitals run 24 hours a day. Different shifts, different uniforms. Nothing about it seemed unusual. If anything, I liked seeing her. She somehow made the room feel less lonely. The nights were the hardest part of recovery. Machines constantly beeped. Air conditioning hummed through vents overhead. Somewhere down the hallway, wheels squeaked across polished floors. Occasionally, someone would cry out in pain. The darkness made every sound seem louder, every shadow longer. Whenever she came into my room, I actually relaxed enough to sleep afterward. By the 6th night, I finally asked her name. She smiled. "Margaret." "Thank you," I said. "You've been really kind." She looked down for a moment before answering. "People need kindness here." Then she walked away. The strange things started the following evening. Around midnight, another nurse entered my room to replace my IV bag. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, coffee cup in one hand. As she worked, I casually asked if Margaret was working tonight. She paused. "Margaret?" "The nurse in the white uniform." She frowned. "We don't have anyone named Margaret on nights." I laughed. "Really? She's been checking on me every night." The nurse looked genuinely confused. "You sure you're not dreaming? Some medications can cause vivid dreams." I shrugged. "Maybe." She finished changing the IV and left. At exactly 2:08 a.m., Margaret walked into my room. Same white uniform, same gentle smile, same cold hands. As she listened to my heartbeat, I mentioned what the other nurse had said. "They don't think you work here." Margaret didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly removed the stethoscope. Somehow, the room felt colder. Finally, she smiled. "Not everyone notices me." Something about the way she said it sent a chill through me. Before I could ask what she meant, she tucked the blanket around my shoulders. "You should rest." Then she disappeared into the hallway. The next morning, I asked another nurse about her. Same reaction, confusion. No Margaret. I even described her. White uniform, gray hair, older woman. Again, nothing. The nurse insisted she had never seen anyone matching that description. She even joked that perhaps I had invented an imaginary nurse because I was lonely. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But it bothered me. That night I decided to stay awake. I wanted proof. At around 1:50 a.m., I grabbed my phone and opened the camera. The battery was only at 14%. I placed it on the bedside table, facing the door, and started recording. The room remained quiet. Monitors beeped steadily. The hallway lights glowed beneath the crack under my door. 2:05, 2:07, 2:08. The handle slowly turned. Margaret stepped inside. She looked directly at me. Then, she looked directly at my phone. Without saying a word, she walked over, reached toward it. The screen instantly went black. Battery dead. Except, it hadn't died. I had watched the battery indicator moments earlier. 14%. She smiled as though nothing had happened. "You don't need proof." I felt my mouth go dry. "You knew I was recording." She didn't answer. Instead, she checked my heartbeat like always. The metal of the stethoscope felt colder than ice. "You have a strong heart," she whispered. It almost stopped once. I stared at her. "What? You don't remember?" My pulse monitor suddenly began beeping faster. She glanced toward it. "You came very close." Then she gently placed her hand over mine. "I wouldn't let you leave." "Leave? Leave where?" Before I could ask, the hallway erupted with shouting. Doctors rushed past my room. Several alarms began sounding nearby. Margaret stood, smiled. "I'll see you tomorrow." She walked through the doorway. I immediately pressed the call button. When the nurse arrived less than a minute later, I hurried into the hallway. Nobody. Empty corridor. No white uniform. Nothing. The following afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I convinced one of the younger nurses to show me the staff directory. Hundreds of names. No Margaret. She laughed. "See, no ghost nurses." Ghost? She meant it as a joke. I didn't. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The room felt different. Heavier. At exactly 2:08, Margaret entered again. Only this time, she wasn't smiling. She looked tired, almost sad. As she checked my heartbeat, I finally asked her directly, "Who are you?" She looked into my eyes for several long seconds. "I'm someone who couldn't save everyone." My breathing slowed. "What does that mean?" "I stayed." The words barely rose above a whisper. So fewer people would be alone. Goosebumps covered my arms. "What happened to you?" She simply shook her head. "You're getting stronger." Then she leaned closer. "So promise me something." "What?" "When they tell you to call your sister, call her." I frowned. "What sister?" She gave the smallest smile. "You've been putting it off." Then she left. The next morning, my doctor entered with discharge paperwork. He said everything looked good. If my final scans came back clear, I could go home that afternoon. Before leaving the room, he casually asked, "Have you arranged someone to pick you up?" "My sister." I answered automatically. Then I froze. I hadn't spoken to my older sister in almost 4 years. We had argued after our father's funeral. Neither of us had apologized. I hadn't even told her about the accident. For some reason, I called her. She cried the moment she answered. She said she'd been thinking about calling me for weeks. By noon, she was sitting beside my bed. Neither of us talked about the argument, It suddenly seemed stupid. Before leaving the hospital, I wanted to thank everyone. The nurses had been incredible. At the station outside my room, I thanked each one individually. Then I asked, "Could you thank Margaret too?" Silence. One nurse looked at another. "Margaret who?" "The older nurse. White uniform. Gray hair. Usually comes in around 2 every morning." Nobody spoke. Finally, one of the oldest nurses slowly stood. She looked pale. "Can you describe her again?" I did. Every detail. The room remained completely silent. The older nurse swallowed hard. Then she quietly asked me to wait. She disappeared into a nearby office. Several minutes later, she returned carrying an old photo album. Not digital, an actual album. Its pages were yellow with age. She flipped through several photographs before stopping. My heart nearly stopped. There she was, Margaret, smiling exactly as I'd seen her every night. Same face, same hair, same white uniform. I immediately pointed. "That's her." Nobody said anything. The older nurse slowly closed the album. Her name was Margaret Sullivan. She worked here for 38 years. I smiled. "See, I told you." The nurse's eyes filled with tears. "She died in this hospital." I laughed. "No, that's impossible." She gently shook her head. "It happened in 1992. I couldn't breathe. She had a heart attack during an overnight shift." The room suddenly felt freezing. She passed away before paramedics could revive her. I stared at the photo. It was impossible, absolutely impossible. The older nurse looked down at the album. Patients used to say she always stayed with the ones who were scared. Another nurse quietly added, "My grandmother worked here. She used to tell stories." Nobody finished the sentence. Nobody needed to. I left the hospital 10 minutes later. I never told my sister what had happened. I knew how insane it sounded. Life slowly returned to normal. My ribs healed. The scars faded. Months passed. Then one evening, I was organizing paperwork from the hospital when something slipped out from between 2 discharge forms. It was a small folded piece of paper. Old. Yellowed. Definitely not something for my admission. My name wasn't on it. Neither was a room number. Just one sentence written in neat blue handwriting. "People need kindness here." It was the exact sentence Margaret had spoken when I thanked her for taking care of me. I still have that note. I've shown it to handwriting experts. None of them can tell me when the ink was written. Whenever someone tells me ghosts aren't real, I don't argue. Maybe they're right. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe the medication did something to my brain. But every year, on the anniversary of my discharge, I send flowers anonymously to St. Augustine Medical Center with a single card attached. It doesn't have a patient's name. It doesn't mention ghosts. It simply reads, "Thank you, Margaret. You kept your promise."